Liv Harper didn't come here to start a fight. She came for order. For structure. After 10 years of working in logistics and operations for one of the largest retail pharmacy networks in the country, she had learned that life flowed better when it followed a system. Spreadsheets, checklists, timelines, that was her language. So when her company offered her a promotion and a relocation package to a new branch closer to the Pacific Northwest, she saw it less as an upheaval and more as a strategic shift, a reset, a controlled one. She chose the new neighborhood precisely because of its reputation: peaceful, clean, secure. Homes looked like they belonged in catalogs. The lawns were identical, and the roads felt engineered, not built. The community was known for its self-regulating board and a set of rules designed to maintain harmony. For someone like Liv, it sounded like paradise. The house she bought wasn't large or flashy. It was the right size for a single woman who preferred silence over noise and certainty over chaos. 3 bedrooms, not that she needed them, and a modest but efficient backyard. She had plans to convert one of the rooms into a proper reading space, floor-to-ceiling shelving, natural light, no screens. Her furniture was minimal but carefully chosen. Every item had a reason to be there. Everything had a function. Her Glock 19 included. It wasn't displayed. It wasn't talked about. It wasn't for drama or for show. It was stored in a locked biometric safe, bolted to the floor, in her bedroom closet next to the fireproof box where she kept her birth certificate, passport, and licensing documents. Liv wasn't a gun enthusiast. She didn't go to the range for fun. She didn't talk about tactics. But she had gone through the proper process, passed the courses, and kept herself informed. She didn't need to explain her reasons to anyone. It was hers, legal, safe. End of story. That is, until she met Karen Slater. Karen introduced herself 3 days after Liv moved in. She rang the bell at 7:45 a.m. on a Monday. Liv, still getting used to the rhythms of the new place, had just poured her first cup of coffee. The doorbell felt jarring, almost intrusive. She opened the door, and there stood a woman in her late 50s, platinum blonde bob cut sharp as glass, tailored beige blazer over a pastel blue blouse, holding a clipboard and a manila folder. She smiled like she'd rehearsed it in the mirror, every muscle placed perfectly. "Good morning. You must be Olivia," she said brightly, though her eyes were already sweeping the interior of the house. "It's Liv," she replied, polite but firm. "Well, Liv, welcome to Brookridge. I'm Karen Slater, head of the community board. We're so thrilled to have you here. I just wanted to stop by and make sure you had the welcome packet and see if you had any questions." Liv stepped onto the porch, gently nudging the door to a 3/4 close. "I appreciate that. I've gone through the documents, yes." Karen's smile twitched. "Wonderful. Of course, the digital copy we emailed is up to date, but there have been a few resolutions passed since the last update. Nothing major, but we'll be holding a neighborhood meeting this Thursday evening. Mandatory attendance." "Understood," Liv said, keeping her tone measured. Karen flipped through her folder, almost theatrically. "There's just one more thing. As part of our updated security initiative, the board is conducting a voluntary but strongly encouraged firearm status check, just to ensure the community remains safe for all residents." Liv blinked. "I'm sorry?" Karen tilted her head, as if surprised that her words needed clarification. "We're asking all new residents to confirm, confidentially of course, whether they own any firearms and whether they've been secured in accordance with our safety guidelines, if they haven't been." "I'm not comfortable answering that," Liv interrupted, not raising her voice, but not softening it either. Karen raised her eyebrows. "Oh? Well, we do require transparency from our residents. It's a cooperative effort. Safety through trust." "I'm a licensed firearms owner," Liv said calmly. "Everything is stored properly and legally. And respectfully, that's all the information I'm providing." The pause that followed was small but deliberate. Karen's eyes narrowed just slightly, her head still tilted like a bird analyzing a foreign object in its nest. She nodded, slowly, then jotted something in her folder. Of course, we just like to keep an open line of communication. After all, we're all neighbors here. She left shortly after that, her smile intact, her tone warm. But Liv could feel it, the shift. Something had just happened that wasn't in the welcome packet. Something that wouldn't be reflected in the clean typography of the digital documents or the tidy maps of bike paths and flower gardens. It was a test. A check, a soft knock to see how much resistance there might be. Liv hadn't passed, and that was going to be a problem. Over the next few days, little things began to change. A package from her employer went missing. The delivery log showed it was dropped at her doorstep, but no box was ever found. The lawn crew that maintained the front yard skipped hers entirely. When she called the number listed in the welcome materials, she was told they were restructuring routes and she would need to pay for an individual subscription. Her recycling bin was left unemptied 2 pickups in a row. And always she caught glimpses of Karen walking a dog that didn't look like it belonged to her, pausing at the edge of Liv's property, pretending to check her phone, or talking to other neighbors with that same practiced smile, nodding toward Liv's house. Their expressions unreadable from a distance. Liv documented everything, not because she felt threatened, but because she knew patterns better than most people. That was her job. And this, whether they wanted to call it that or not, was the beginning of a pattern. Still, she stayed quiet. She went to the meeting on Thursday, sat near the back, said nothing, took notes. She watched Karen operate, addressing the room like a queen before her court, casually mentioning new guidelines, suggesting updates to residential code enforcement, referring to vague concerns from anonymous community members. And then, slipping almost unnoticed into the agenda, came the phrase, updated voluntary firearm restrictions. A new draft resolution, strongly encouraging residents to surrender their weapons for storage in a centralized security container, monitored by an outside contractor in partnership with community leadership. Karen smiled as she said it, hands folded at her waist. We're not banning anything. We're just making everyone feel safer. Liv glanced around the room. No one raised their hand. No one asked a question. Most just nodded, murmured, or looked at their phones. That night, Liv returned home, locked the doors, and opened her safe. Her firearm was still there, secure, untouched. But for the first time in years, she didn't sleep well. Not because she felt unsafe, but because she didn't trust the system anymore. And for someone like Liv, that was worse. Much worse. She didn't know it yet, but this place wasn't paradise. It was a trap, and she had just stepped into it with both feet. 3 days after the community meeting, Liv came home to find her front door slightly ajar. Not open, just cracked, the latch no longer seated, the handle off by maybe half an inch. It was the kind of detail most people wouldn't notice. But Liv noticed. She noticed because she had locked it. Twice. The way she always did. She stood on the porch for a full minute, grocery bags dangling from her hands, heart rate steady but climbing. She stepped back, set the bags down quietly, and circled the house. All windows closed. No sign of forced entry. Everything looked still. Perfect even. That was the problem. She entered the house slowly, silently. She moved room to room, checking corners like she'd done instinctively for years, not out of paranoia, but because safety was a habit. Nothing appeared stolen. No drawers pulled, no furniture moved. Just silence. Everything was in its place. Until she reached the bedroom. The closet door stood open, that she remembered closing. The safe wasn't visibly damaged, but the dust line around it was broken, shifted. She knelt down and pressed her thumb to the biometric pad. The click was sluggish. Inside, her documents were untouched: license, certificates, locked hard drive, all still there. But the gun was gone. Liv didn't freeze. She didn't panic. She closed the safe, stood, and called the police. When the officers arrived, two of them, younger, disinterested, they took her statement. She explained, clearly and concisely, that the firearm had been stored in a bolted safe, biometric locked, inside a secured home. She had not authorized any entry. She showed her license, her permits, the open door. One of the officers, barely 25 by the look of him, nodded along but didn't write much. The other asked questions in the tone of someone going through a checklist, not someone engaged. Then came the pause and the shift. "Ma'am," the younger one said carefully, "are you aware your neighborhood is part of the Brookridge Community Oversight Partnership?" She blinked. "That sounds made up." "It's a private security initiative," the officer replied. "They coordinate with local jurisdictions for shared enforcement. According to our database, this area falls under their community regulation tier." Liv stared at him. "Are you telling me the police won't investigate a break-in because the community says it's covered?" "No, ma'am," the other officer jumped in. "What we're saying is, if the oversight team has conducted an internal action, and there's no sign of unlawful entry, we may not have jurisdiction." "It's my house," she said flatly. "My property. Are you seriously suggesting someone can enter my home, remove a legally owned, locked, registered firearm, and you won't log it as a crime?" The older one sighed, clearly uncomfortable. "It's complicated. I'll write it up. But if it turns out the board initiated a safety check under a community safety clause, it's going to get referred back to their oversight body." That's when she knew. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't a mistake or even a rogue act. This was sanctioned. Someone, under the cover of policy, had walked into her home, opened her safe, and removed her firearm not to steal it, but to make a point, to assert authority, to test how far they could push. Liv closed the door behind the officers and stood in the center of her living room for a long time. No gun, no help, no accountability. That night she wrote everything down, every word, every timestamp. Then, the next morning, she contacted her attorney. Her legal counsel, Meredith Blake, wasn't the typical lawyer found on Google. Liv had worked with her briefly years back on a corporate zoning dispute and remembered her as ruthless, methodical, and uninterested in pleasantries. When Liv called, Meredith listened to the story in silence, then asked only one question. "Did you sign any addendums in your closing documents about community firearm restrictions?" "No," Liv said immediately. "I reviewed every page myself. There was a vague clause about safety guidelines, but nothing that overrides state or federal law." "Send me your documents," Meredith said. "Everything. I'll call you in 48 hours. True to her word, Meredith called back 2 days later. "They're playing with language," she said. "Your board, they passed a resolution last year declaring this community a voluntary disarmament zone. It's not law. It's not enforceable. But they buried it in the HOA minutes as a binding behavioral expectation." Liv didn't even flinch. "So what does that mean?" "It means they can't legally take your property. But if they convinced local police they were acting under a community clause, the cops might have stepped back. What's worse, they probably documented the seizure as a compliance check, not a confiscation. So they took it, said it wasn't theft, and told the police it was protocol?" "Exactly. And unless we hit back fast, they'll turn that narrative into a precedent. Which means next time, it'll be easier for them, not for you." Liv didn't wait. She followed Meredith's instructions and submitted a formal demand for an inventory of all items held by the Brookridge Security Oversight Committee. She submitted a public records request to the police department for any reports or internal memos referencing her address in the last 10 days. She contacted her insurance company and notified them of a loss under suspicious and disputed conditions. Every move she made was legal, documented, traceable, no accusations, just paperwork. But it was pressure applied exactly where bureaucrats feel it most. That evening, a thick envelope was slipped under her door. No postage, no return address, just her name typed in bold. Inside was a single page on letterhead, stamped with the Brookridge Community Board insignia. It read, "Dear resident, in light of recent safety concerns and an abundance of caution, the Brookridge Oversight Team has conducted a community-level compliance action. Your previously disclosed firearm has been secured in a centralized safety vault in accordance with Resolution 22C. You may appeal this action in writing at the next scheduled board review session. We thank you for your cooperation in making Brookridge a safer, more harmonious place to live. Sincerely, Karen Slater, Board President." Liv read it once, then again, then slowly, methodically folded it and slid it into a folder marked Escalations. She didn't scream, didn't throw anything, just sat at the table, her jaw set. This wasn't about safety. It wasn't about law or crime prevention or public welfare. It was about obedience, about stripping away choice and calling it community. And they thought they could get away with it because no one would fight them. Because most people just wanted peace and quiet and weren't willing to make noise. They were wrong. Liv wasn't most people. Liv didn't wait for the next board session. She didn't request an appeal or submit a letter of complaint. She filed a cease and desist notice through her attorney, formally citing unlawful entry, unauthorized seizure of property, in violation of federal statutes regarding registered firearms. It was precise, unambiguous, and backed by citations Meredith had pulled from both state law and constitutional precedents. The letter was delivered by courier directly to the community board office and required a signature. It arrived at 9:43 a.m. on a Tuesday. By noon, Liv's internet cut out. At first, she thought it was just a service interruption. She called the provider. They said her account was under review due to a pending service suspension requested by the property's managing association. When she asked what that meant, the rep on the line fumbled through a script and transferred her to a supervisor, who eventually admitted that the board had requested disconnection due to non-compliance with regional digital safety standards. It was nonsense. Total fiction. But the provider didn't care. Their contract allowed for modifications requested by the residential association, and Liv hadn't paid for any override. The same day, her Amazon delivery bounced back, marked access restricted by neighborhood protocol. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a siege, soft, quiet, but deliberate. They weren't trying to arrest her or attack her directly. They were isolating her, peeling away conveniences one layer at a time. Death by 1,000 administrative cuts. She kept working. Her job didn't slow down, and remote operations meant she didn't need to be in a corporate office, but the pattern continued. Her lawn went uncut for 2 weeks. The neighborhood landscaper claimed her property was under inspection. Her mailbox suddenly sprouted a sticker, "Review pending." When she removed it, a new one appeared the next day, with a notice stapled beneath it, warning of obstruction of official compliance signage. She began to feel eyes on her wherever she went, not just from Karen, who now walked her dog past Liv's house no fewer than 4 times a day, always at the same pace, always glancing toward the windows, but from others. People she hadn't even spoken to. The man across the street, who'd once waved during moving day, now crossed to the opposite sidewalk when she came out to check the mail. A mother she had seen pushing a stroller began avoiding her entirely, steering the child in the opposite direction. A local dog walker who'd once said hello now made a point of adjusting his earbuds and staring at the ground when passing her driveway. And always that same undercurrent of curated silence. No one yelled. No one accused. But no one smiled either. Meredith continued pressing on the legal side, but results were slow. Liv's formal requests were met with either vague replies or procedural delays. The board claimed the weapon had been securely relocated for safety and that she had consented to participation by virtue of moving into the neighborhood. The phrasing was slippery. She hadn't signed anything that explicitly granted the board rights to seize personal property, but the fine print in the development's master agreement, which had been bundled into a mountain of closing documents, included language about emergency security interventions deemed necessary by elected community leadership. It was overbroad, likely unenforceable, but it gave them a foothold to drag everything out in red tape. And then came the flyers. They appeared on the mailboxes of every resident on Liv Street. Unbranded, printed on pale blue paper. They bore no official seal, no names, no contact information, just a bold headline, "Know who's living near you." Beneath it, in smaller type, was a single paragraph outlining the dangers of unregulated private armament, followed by a claim that one of the residents on the block had previously refused to comply with safety standards and had been found in unauthorized possession of lethal weapons. It didn't name her. It didn't have to. The damage was immediate. Overnight, neighbors began drawing curtains when she stepped outside. A package of eggs exploded across her front walkway. Her trash cans were overturned, not by wind or animals, but with calculated placement, one upright, one perfectly balanced on its side, lids missing. One evening just after dusk, her doorbell rang. She checked the camera feed, no one was there. Just a paper taped to the door. "Your time here is borrowed." The handwriting was clean. No threats. No swearing. Just that sentence. Liv reported it to the police again. This time, the officer who responded was different, older, more cautious. He listened, took notes, looked genuinely concerned. But when he left, he gave her a subtle warning. "This neighborhood's tight-knit," he said, tone low. "The board's got reach. If I were you, I'd think about whether it's worth the stress. Folks around here have a way of pushing people out when they want to." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. She knew exactly what he meant. That weekend, she drove to her company's downtown location not for work, but to meet with her district's facilities coordinator. She requested and received authorization to use the on-site storage lockers to house sensitive personal equipment. She moved all remaining valuables, documents, and backup devices to the facility the next morning, discreetly and without notice. She began backing up every interaction, every letter, every piece of correspondence. Meredith requested surveillance footage from the property developer, citing a legal basis under ongoing investigation. Liv knew they'd resist, but she was preparing. The final straw came on a Thursday morning. She was returning from a run, earbuds in, sweat cooling on her skin, when she noticed a small crowd gathered 2 houses down, board members, maintenance staff, and someone in a branded uniform she didn't recognize. They were inspecting something near the curb. A small metal box, newly mounted at knee height, with an LED screen and what looked like a sensor. Liv approached cautiously. Karen turned at the sound of her shoes on pavement. "Oh, Liv. Good morning." Her tone was faux bright, as always. "You'll be pleased to know we're installing new perimeter monitors. Passive sensors. Non-invasive, of course. Just another step to ensure everyone in our community feels safe." Liv stared at the box. "Those scan for metal." Karen blinked, smile frozen. "They monitor for anomalies." "I didn't consent to having a surveillance device aimed at my property." Karen's smile stretched. "Well, this street is shared space, and the community has spoken clearly about the importance of proactive safety." Liv stepped closer. "I don't care what your committee decided. This is harassment." Karen's expression changed, then not overtly, but enough. The eyes cooled. The smile stiffened. "If you feel threatened, Liv, you're welcome to submit a grievance. But I would remind you that this neighborhood has rules, and we expect everyone to follow them." Liv didn't flinch. She walked back to her house, locked the door, and called Meredith. "They've escalated. They're scanning the street." Meredith didn't ask for details. "Then we escalate too. I'm filing a formal complaint with the state attorney's office. They want a war of patience. We'll give them a war of process. And I'll reach out to someone I trust, a regulatory auditor who's been tracking overreach in private associations." Liv hung up, breathing slowly, pulse steady. They wanted her afraid. They wanted her cornered. But she wasn't going anywhere. And now, for the first time, they weren't the only ones watching. 2 weeks after the perimeter sensors were installed, Liv received a letter that wasn't from the board, wasn't in the usual sanitized font, and didn't come with a prepaid reply envelope. This one came on heavy cardstock, folded by hand and delivered to her mailbox without postage. The envelope was unsealed. Inside was a single sentence typed on plain paper: "I know what they did. Be careful who you trust." There was no signature, no contact number, no watermark. She scanned it for fingerprints, for marks, for anything that might suggest its origin. Nothing. Not even the faint scent of perfume or paper dust. It was professionally neutral clinical. But the fact it existed at all meant one thing: someone inside the board, or at least close to it, had broken ranks. Liv didn't know if it was a warning, a veiled threat, or the first hint of an ally. Either way, she didn't throw it away. Meredith had kept her word. The complaint had been filed with the state attorney general's office, and she had contacted a private regulatory auditor, Ethan Rollins, a former compliance officer who specialized in oversight violations by quasi-private governance bodies. He wasn't a cop, he wasn't press, and he wasn't loud. He was thorough. Within 48 hours of receiving the first file, he requested access to the community's infrastructure funding records, citing a state statute that required financial transparency in resident-funded developments. The board refused, of course, but refusal was itself a flag, and one Liv knew Ethan would not let slide. What Liv hadn't expected was the counterstrike to come through her employer. Her direct supervisor scheduled a wellness check-in with HR. The email was sterile, masked as routine, but the wording was sharp: concern over recent external stressors, internal reports of conflict in a personal residence, and a suggestion that she take advantage of temporary paid leave to prioritize emotional well-being. No one used the word suspension, but the intent was clear. She was being nudged away gently, officially, but without her consent. When she questioned the basis of the report, she was told off the record that a community leader had submitted a professional reference review to the company's corporate contact desk, highlighting concerning behavioral changes and a pattern of confrontational behavior related to weaponry. It was anonymous, of course, but Liv knew the language. She could practically see Karen dictating the words. She didn't take leave. Instead, she doubled her output, logged extra hours, requested additional oversight and documentation reviews to keep her name in workflows. The goal was simple: make herself invaluable, too integrated to be excised by rumor. She turned every attack into a record, every suspicious shift into a report. She took their tactics and made them visible. At home, things escalated. Her home surveillance system began logging signal disruptions every night at exactly 2:17 a.m. The video feed would go black for 17 seconds, then return. No power loss, no Wi-Fi drop, just dead air, perfectly timed. The company that sold her the system claimed they'd never seen that kind of interference. Liv documented the incidents, had a hardware expert analyze the routers, and found a custom frequency blocker placed somewhere within 30 yards of her house. Not strong enough to disable the entire system, just enough to blind it in brief pulses, short windows of silence when anyone could approach the house unseen. She filed a complaint with the city's telecom authority, citing suspected tampering with licensed communication equipment. Meredith followed up by pressing the provider for cooperation under civil liability for property interference. The board denied involvement, as always, but the pattern was clear. Then came the board hearing. They called it an evaluation session. Residents were encouraged to attend, and Liv knew immediately it would be a public trial masked as community feedback. The hearing was held in the clubhouse, a glass-fronted, wood-trimmed structure that looked more like a wellness retreat than a place where neighbors were quietly dismantled. The room was full. Residents sat in orderly rows, pamphlets in hand, refreshments neatly arranged on a side table. Karen stood at the front with her signature pastel jacket and her controlled, matronly posture. She welcomed everyone, praised the turnout, emphasized the value of unified safety, then turned the discussion to ongoing compliance tensions with a single resident. She never said Liv's name, but she didn't need to. She cited an escalation of resistance, alluded to unregistered weapons, and warned of legal liabilities posed by rogue behavior. A few residents nodded. Others glanced at each other with discomfort. One man raised his hand and asked softly if there had actually been any crimes committed. Karen smiled patiently and said, "Not yet." Liv stood then. She walked to the front without raising her voice, without pointing fingers. She spoke clearly and slowly. "I've lived here for 2 months. My home was entered without consent. My property was removed. My utilities have been tampered with, my reputation smeared, and my privacy breached. I have not violated a single law. I have not threatened anyone. I've defended my rights. And I have documented everything. You don't have to like me. But I suggest you ask yourselves how quickly the rules you're applauding today could be used against you tomorrow." She didn't wait for applause. There wasn't any. Karen watched her, still smiling, but her fingers clenched the edge of the lectern just slightly too hard. After the meeting, as residents filtered out in silence, a man in a tan jacket dropped something into Liv's bag as he passed her in the hallway. She found it later, a flash drive, labeled only with the letter K. Inside were 2 video files, grainy night footage of 3 men entering a storage facility marked board access only and removing sealed containers. The timestamp matched the night her firearm was taken. The war had just changed. Now it had evidence. The flash drive changed everything. Not because it proved what Liv already suspected she had known from the start, that her firearm hadn't simply disappeared into bureaucratic haze, but because it showed hands, faces, movement. 3 men, one of them wearing a recognizable maintenance jacket from the Brookridge staff, entering a storage facility after hours, no lights, no security badge taps, no logs. The way they moved, quickly and without speaking, told her this wasn't the first time they had done something like this. It wasn't a one-off. It was a system, refined and practiced. And now she had them in motion. The footage wasn't high resolution, and the camera angle was obstructed near the far corner, but it was enough to identify the location and establish a timeline. Meredith filed an immediate request for an injunction against the board's control over seized materials, arguing that illegal retention of personal property could now be demonstrated with visual evidence. Liv assumed this would slow things down. She assumed wrong. The next week, the board retaliated in a way Liv hadn't predicted. Her house was reclassified by the committee as in non-conformity with the community's emerging safety doctrine. That phrase, emerging safety doctrine, was new. It wasn't part of any of the previous documents, bylaws, or public announcements. But it was quickly weaponized. Within 48 hours of the designation, Liv received a citation claiming her presence constituted a known structural non-compliance threat. A euphemism designed to justify the issuance of a provisional removal notice. It wasn't quite an eviction, but it was a step toward forcibly displacing her under the guise of protecting the collective. She appealed, of course. Through Meredith, she submitted a request for administrative review, forcing the board into procedural delay. But that didn't stop them from making her life smaller by the hour. Her driveway was blocked 2 mornings in a row by landscaping trucks accidentally assigned to the wrong lot. Her water pressure dropped to a slow trickle without explanation, only to return an hour later after she filed a service complaint. Her trash wasn't collected. Her recycling bin was tagged with a red sticker that simply read "Review Pending." The same day, someone or several someones left a box on her porch. Inside it were 10 spent casings, lined in cotton like a presentation. She photographed it, bagged it, and sent it to Meredith. The police, again, logged the incident as non-threatening. No fingerprints, no leads, nothing actionable. Meanwhile, the board filed their own complaint against her, a civil action alleging disruption of community harmony, digital defamation, and repeated harassment of board officials. Karen's name appeared prominently in the filing. It was coordinated, strategic, and padded with hearsay dressed up as testimony. Anonymous witnesses. Statements from neighbors about feeling tense or uneasy when Liv walked by. One quote claimed she monitored everyone and watched through her blinds like she was preparing something. The irony was bitter. The same people who walked by her house every day, stared into her windows, tracked her deliveries, now claimed to be victims of her vigilance. What made it worse was that the court accepted the filing. Not because the evidence was strong, it wasn't, but because, in this type of case, burden falls heavily on perception. In community-driven lawsuits, the lines between law and optics blur. A judge doesn't just weigh legality. They weigh social order. And the board knew that. They weren't trying to win a clean case. They were trying to pressure her into settling or folding. Meredith's response was surgical. She countersued for civil rights violations, abuse of governance power, illegal property seizure, and personal endangerment. She included the flash drive footage, 3 affidavits from colleagues attesting to Liv's stability and professionalism, and a declaration from the surveillance expert confirming the existence of the signal jamming field around Liv's property. It was a strong response, but it came at a cost. Liv's name was now in public records as part of a hostile civil action. News of the case began to spread, not through media, but through something more insidious, financial channels. 2 of her insurance policies were flagged for reassessment. Her life insurance provider requested a status verification update, a move typically reserved for clients engaged in high-risk behavior. Her home insurance premium spiked 23% without warning. When she called, the representative, clearly reading from a script, told her, "We are reviewing coverage based on the presence of ongoing legal proceedings involving personal security disputes." She knew exactly where that language came from. The board hadn't just targeted her through neighborhood pressure. They were coordinating with outside firms, nudging, hinting, reshaping her digital profile to reflect volatility. Liv fought it by returning to fundamentals. Every bill paid on time, every document filed through proper channels, every escalation routed through Meredith. She scheduled a voluntary third-party inspection of her property to preempt further code violations. She began keeping physical records of every delivery, every visitor, every interaction. She rotated her surveillance tech and switched to a hardened analog system with manual redundancy. She wasn't just defending her house now, she was documenting a siege. And she wasn't alone. 2 days after the flash drive, Ethan, the auditor Meredith, had uncovered that the community's recent financial filings included line items for behavioral compliance consulting. The vendor, under a shell LLC, was traced back to a private security firm known for urban reputation management. Liv read the report twice. This wasn't a local dispute anymore. It was a trial run for a model. How far could a community body go in reshaping resident behavior using surveillance, legal manipulation, and social pressure without violating formal law? She wasn't a problem. She was a test case. Karen, of course, denied everything. She called the allegations baseless, a paranoid interpretation of coordinated policy. At a follow-up board meeting, she smiled as she assured residents that everything happening was within operational bounds. She referenced Liv's court case without using her name and thanked the community for its commitment to unity in difficult times. Liv was there, sitting in the second row. She didn't speak. She didn't glare. She didn't rise when Karen tried to provoke a reaction, but she was watching, and she knew Karen saw that. That night, someone spray-painted a single word on Liv's back fence. Not a slur. Not a threat. Just one word, all caps, submit. It was clean. Neatly done. Not the work of vandals, but of someone delivering a message. She didn't scrub it off. She left it there. Took photos. Cataloged it. Meredith filed an emergency motion the next morning, citing the growing pattern of coordinated suppression and psychological intimidation. The judge granted a temporary protection order against further procedural action by the board until both suits were resolved. It wasn't a victory, but it was a shield, a pause, a signal to the board that they had crossed a line. Liv returned home that afternoon to find her power restored, her mailbox cleared, her trash collected. No letters, no tags, no noise. For the first time in weeks, the neighborhood was quiet, too quiet. The silence didn't last. It was never meant to. It was just the breath between tactics the temporary lull boards like this relied on to give residents the illusion that conflict had passed, that maybe things were returning to normal, that maybe it wasn't worth pushing any further. But Liv knew better. She didn't misread quiet for peace. She read it for what it was, recalibration. The board had taken a hit not just from her legal counters and the injunction, but from the layers of exposure Meredith and Ethan had begun to peel back. Now the board wasn't just worried about suppressing a resident, they were worried about being observed. And when people like Karen felt watched, they didn't retreat. They hardened. The real break came not through the courts or a boardroom, but through a misplaced file, an accident, or possibly an intentional leak. No one could confirm which. Ethan received it through an anonymous encrypted email. The contents were unremarkable at first, a series of internal memos labeled behavioral tier response protocols, but embedded within the documents was an internal training module created for new community board security liaisons. The video walkthrough outlined specific steps for containment escalation, including targeted utility interference, structured psychological deterrence methods, to controlled rumor campaigns, and social isolation pressure points. It was sanitized, clinical, and horrifying. It read like a manual for eroding a person's life from the inside out, all while maintaining the appearance of administrative legitimacy. Meredith reviewed the material in silence. When she finally spoke, her voice was sharper than Liv had ever heard it. They turned this neighborhood into a live simulation. You're not just a resident, you're a data point. With the new material, they prepared to move fast. The next court date was set, not a final ruling, but a hearing to determine whether the board's actions constituted abuse of power and unlawful retaliation. Meredith submitted the leaked protocol along with a signed affidavit from the security specialist Ethan had consulted. Liv's statement was attached last, not as an accusation, but as a chronological breakdown of every violation, supported with time-stamped logs, external confirmations, and visual records. The file was 148 pages long, every word factual, every claim evidenced, no speculation, no emotion, just data, presented with surgical clarity. Karen showed up to the hearing dressed in navy blue, pearls, and that same meticulous posture she always used to project warmth that wasn't real. She sat behind her lawyer, a corporate litigator clearly more familiar with contracts than community ethics, and didn't look at Liv once. The courtroom was quiet, sparse, the kind of low attendance hearing that boards banked on. But Liv didn't care about the audience. She cared about the record, and the judge cared about that too. When Meredith presented the footage from the flash drive and cross-referenced it with the facility's internal clock, the judge leaned forward. When she played segments of the training module that referred to adjusted resident outcomes through indirect stress application, the judge stopped taking notes and started underlining. And when she calmly read aloud the email sent from the board to the insurance assessor, falsely describing Liv as mentally unstable and armed, the judge's jaw clenched. It was the kind of detail that couldn't be explained away by policy. It was malice intentional, documented, and now public. Karen's team tried to argue that the board had acted in the interest of community safety, that Liv had been evasive, that her resistance was disruptive. But there was no energy behind the arguments, no spine. Every point they raised was deflected by the growing wall of facts. At one point, Karen herself stood up unprompted and attempted to explain the board's intent as restorative and community-centric, but it only gave Meredith the opportunity to press her on direct involvement. Were you aware that your board ordered the installation of unregistered signal interference hardware aimed at a resident's home? Karen froze. We authorized safety upgrades. Were you aware of the psychological impact these unauthorized disruptions caused? Did you log any attempt to notify the resident of changes to monitoring near her private property? Karen said nothing. Did you authorize a private contractor to remove a registered firearm from a secured safe without a warrant, a judicial order, or police accompaniment? The room held its breath. Karen's voice cracked. We believed the item presented a risk. The law, Meredith said coldly, doesn't care what you believe. It cares what you can prove. The hearing closed without a verdict, as expected. The judge needed time to review the full file. But the tone had shifted. Liv felt it not just in the way the courtroom sat in silence as the parties left, but in the way Karen walked. Slower, shoulders slightly curled inward. For the first time, her posture had cracked. But the board didn't wait for a ruling. They issued a last strike, a final swing they must have known wouldn't hold in court but could still inflict damage in public. They held an emergency community session and broadcasted it on the internal resident portal. In it, Karen gave a carefully worded speech calling for renewed unity and claiming the board had been subject to unjustified external interference. She never named Liv, but she described a resident acting in opposition to the collective. She accused unnamed parties of sabotaging neighborhood trust and concluded by announcing a motion to review residency compatibility for certain homeowners. Liv watched the stream from her desk, expression blank. She didn't record a response. She didn't post a statement. Instead, she forwarded the video to her attorney, then to the State Oversight Board for Residential Governance. That was enough. The next morning, a cease and desist order arrived at the board's office not from Meredith, but from the Office of Legal Affairs under the Department of Civic Integrity. It cited misuse of communal authority, unregistered surveillance infrastructure, and potential civil rights violations. By evening, the video had been pulled from the portal. Liv stood at her kitchen window, lights off, coffee cooling in her hand. She didn't feel triumphant. There was no rush of vindication. What she felt was quieter, not peace, but distance, a widening between what they had done and what she was willing to absorb. This wasn't over. The ruling hadn't come down yet. Karen was still in her position. The sensors were still on the street. Her gun was still locked somewhere in a box, cataloged as an unclaimed risk artifact, but the facade had broken. And once a system breaks its illusion of control, it's already losing. The ruling came 17 days after the hearing. A thick envelope, sealed in official state packaging, arrived by certified mail and was signed for at the front desk of the Brookridge Community Office. The same day, another copy was hand-delivered to Liv's attorney, stamped and indexed by the state superior court. The decision spanned 32 pages, but the summary, printed in bold near the top of the first page, said everything. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Olivia Harper, and determines that the Brookridge Community Board engaged in repeated, coordinated violations of constitutional rights, property laws, and abuse of administrative power. All actions executed by the board or its contractors against the plaintiff regarding property seizure, surveillance, defamation, or infrastructure manipulation are deemed unlawful and must be reversed. The plaintiff's property is to be returned in full within 7 business days, and all board-imposed sanctions vacated immediately. Attached was a fine schedule, citations for review by regulatory agencies, and an order for the community board to submit to a 6-month external audit. The firearm was returned in a sealed case with a notarized inventory. It had never been entered into evidence. It had never even been recorded with law enforcement. It had simply sat, silent and forgotten, in a storage unit under Karen's private authority, logged only in internal spreadsheets with no legal designation. Liv accepted it without ceremony. She had already moved beyond the act of getting it back. What mattered now was that the board had been exposed not as protectors of peace, but as manipulators of structure. The very tools meant to manage order had been bent into instruments of control, and that bending had finally snapped. Karen submitted her resignation the same afternoon the ruling was announced. Her letter was brief, impersonal, addressed only to the residents of Brookridge. She did not attend the emergency session called by the Interim Governance Committee. She did not speak publicly again. Within a week, her house went on the market, listed quietly through a private firm, no open houses, no lawn signs. She was gone before the leaves began to fall. The community entered a strange quiet after that, not hostile, not celebratory, just still. Neighbors passed Liv on the sidewalk without speaking. Some offered nods, others avoided eye contact altogether. No one apologized. No one explained. That was fine. She didn't need them to. The board was restructured under external guidance. Several minor members were removed for complicity in administrative overreach. The sensors on the street were taken down within 30 days. The signal blocker, traced to a contractor linked to the board, was decommissioned. Liv received a formal letter from the Department of Civic Integrity acknowledging her role in exposing systemic misuse within community governance and offering an advisory position in a newly formed resident oversight council. She declined politely. She wasn't looking to lead, she just wanted her home. Repairs were done quietly, new fencing installed where the spray paint had bled through too deep, cameras replaced with analog backups, storage lockers rotated and emptied. She didn't return to her company's downtown location. She kept working remote with full access restored. Her insurance premiums returned to baseline, and a formal apology was issued by her provider, citing processing irregularities caused by external reporting not aligned with factual assessment. Meredith received a commendation from the local bar association for her work on the case and offered Liv a quiet, knowing smile over their last legal review. Most people would have left, she said. You didn't. Liv simply replied, they wanted compliance. They got resistance. That's the difference. The fence was plain, no signs, no slogans, no statements, just a border defined firm and hers. At night she would sit in the kitchen with the lights off, just like she used to, not because she was watching anymore, but because she was content to see nothing. No movement, no messages, no conflict. Just her street, her space and silence that no longer felt like warning. Brookridge moved on. A new board was appointed. Rules were revised. Transparency reports were published quarterly, then monthly. The Oversight Committee's presence became routine, not intrusive. No more surprise inspections. No more anonymous tips. For most, it was as if nothing had happened. But for Liv, everything had changed, not just her surroundings, but her understanding of how thin the line really was between order and oppression when enforced without accountability. She had entered this place believing in structure. She still did. But now she knew it had to be earned, not imposed. She never saw Karen again, and she never needed to. Because in the end, she hadn't won by overpowering anyone. She'd won by refusing to surrender, by holding the line not with rage or fear, but with clarity, precision, and truth. The same tools they'd tried to use against her. And that was something no board, no bylaw, and no signature could erase.